unlikely place for Soviet submarines, I'm sure they would pitch in and rescue these men.
But
the Russians have been pretty open about that kind of thing recently, by the way. They returned part of what was apparently the Apollo 9 lunar module Bob Run referred to earlier. They returned that to us a few weeks ago.
Assuming the C-130 affects the rescue and the pararescue men jump, they could theoretically stay with that capsule for a day or even more until a ship came by. Is that right?
Right. And we're talking, Jim, in any case, of a landing no sooner than Thursday afternoon or, say, 54 or 5 hours from now. And I'm sure that emergency orders have already gone out from the war room at the Pentagon and the recovery room in Houston, Mission Control, to get 1 or 2 destroyers headed there very rapidly. We'll recap the situation in a moment. Let's pause now for 5 seconds so our stations may identify themselves. Jules Bergman and Jim Burns at ABC Space Headquarters in New York. Long into the morning, close on 5 a.m. on this emergency day, this emergency morning for Apollo 13. The worst of the emergency would seem to be over at this point. The LEM, the Lunar Module's Descent Propulsion System engine, has been used to change the trajectory of Apollo 13 and get the 2 spacecraft headed back into a free return trajectory, which will see them rounding the moon at about 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight, and then a second burn will be done to speed up their return toward the Earth. We're hearing the 3 astronauts on air-to-ground receiving detailed instructions from Capcom Jack Lausma in Houston, new state vectors, new guidance vectors for their computer and onboard condition. The 3 astronauts are in good condition. Lunar Module pilot Fred Hayes has been ordered to go to sleep in about 45 minutes for a 6-hour sleep cycle, while Jim Lovell remains on duty in the Lunar Module. Jack Swigert remains on duty, cycle, alert, in the Command Module. Hayes will coast down through the tunnel weightlessly to the Command Module and sleep for 6 hours. He'll be followed in that sleep cycle by Jim Lovell. Now we'll show you again in our electronic telestrator, if we can establish the moon and the Earth here, exactly the way the situation is at 62 and a half hours into this, what was once trouble-free mission, Jim. Here we have the Earth from where Apollo 13 was launched this past Saturday afternoon at 2:13 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, though it seems like 6 months ago. And here was the flight path they took on their way to the moon, which we will put here. Now, at this point, 5/6 of the way to the moon at 9:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time last night, the emergency began when Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes, returning from an inspection of the lunar module, heard a loud bang. 2 of their 3 fuel cells, which supply the Command Module's basic electrical supply, went haywire. The oxygen supply went to nothing. They began losing breathing oxygen as well. And at that point, with all power failing, they were ordered to get into the lunar module. Lovell and Hayes got back in the lunar module, powered it up, and that's where they are at this very moment, living off its oxygen, using its batteries to power them up. Jack Swigert, the Command Module pilot, is flying in the Command Module alone. Both pilots are docked. You might say, if it weren't such a bad pun, that Jack Swigert was in the dark, which he is there using battery power. Now, about a half an hour ago, an emergency burn was done of the LEM's Descent Propulsion System engine. The most dangerous part of the electrical loss of the Command Module was the fact that the SPS, or Service Propulsion System engine, could no longer be powered up. So the LEM's engine was used to change the orbit. I'll clean this up. Get a little sloppy here with this. To change the orbit of the 2 spacecraft, so that instead of looping far out around the moon like yay, after the burn was done roughly here, they were in a free return trajectory carrying them 136 miles around the moon at point of closest approach, and will glide back with no further power to the Earth. But indeed, that return to the Earth will be sped up because of a possibly critical oxygen supply aboard the spacecraft. So, when they arrive at this point behind the moon at 9:30 p.m. tonight, Jim, where normally the trans-Earth insertion burn would have been done 3 or 4 days from now after those moonwalks and all those glorious things that are now forgotten. When they arrive at this point, the descent engine will be fired up again to speed their recovery so that instead of it taking 78 hours, which was the initial guess, it'll probably take 1 day less or about 54 hours if we've subtracted correctly.
Jules, would you show us with your model there what this spaceship would have looked like coming back if it had been a routine mission, and what it's going to look like coming back now? I'm interested in the fact that part of the LEM is going to be aboard which would ordinarily not be aboard. Is that right?
Yes, Jim. Not to be sarcastic, but all of them better be aboard or they're not going to make it back. Normally
all of it would not be.
Normally we wouldn't be losing our headset here either. Let me glue that back on, and there we go. All right. Now, normally, this is what would return from the moon. The two astronauts, of course, would have taken off from the moon using the ascent stage of the lunar module here, docked with the command module around the moon, then jettisoned the lunar module. This was all gone. The descent stage, of course, that engine got them onto the moon. It was left on the moon. The ascent stage powered them off the moon up to a docking. After they docked in lunar orbit with the command module and the service module here, they would have jettisoned the ascent stage, and it would have been sent remotely off into impacting the moon for seismological research, which seems pretty vague and distant after this emergency. All right. Now what has happened is that they're flying along this way, and the LEM is the basic vehicle. It's the backup or insurance policy that's saving their lives. And they will swing around the moon using the LEM like this. The attitude will be like that. Crossing my arms a little to speed up their return to Earth like yay. They will stay with the LEM because they'll need its oxygen and electrical supply all the way. They will stay with the LEM until just shortly before re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere is due Thursday or Friday afternoon. Then all three men will get back into the command module. They will jettison the LEM, as happened on Apollo 9, which will then burn up in the Earth's atmosphere after having done a fine job of saving their lives. They'll then also jettison the service module here, separating it from that way to a turn like this, and then using nothing more than a few reaction control system thrusters powered by the three onboard batteries in Apollo will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific or the Atlantic. It seems more likely that it'll be the Pacific, but it really isn't decided yet.
So what you're going to have here is the part of the LEM which would ordinarily have been on the moon, sitting there, will be still with them, and the part that would have brought them back up from the moon will also be there. So the whole package is coming back to the atmosphere, practically to the atmosphere.
Right.
Is that right?
Well, yes, the whole package will come back to the atmosphere. The LEM's 2 stages. The service module will burn up. The command module is what the 3 men will re-enter in. And of course, the LEM's engine is critical to that second burn that has to be done later tonight, about 16 hours from now, to speed up the return so as to guarantee that they don't run out of oxygen. We're going to go back now, Jim, to those halcyon days, if I say it a second time. It was only about 8 hours ago when we had a second television pass from the lunar module as they inspected it. As Lovell and Hayes were aboard, let's tune in.
Houston 13, are you still on TV? Yeah, we sure are. We got a good picture of the skipper there. Okay, well, we can show you now a little added benefit. We've got the drogue on Fred's couch in the command module right now. So we stood it temporarily while we're checking out the Aquarius. And underneath his couch, we've got the probe stowed. Quite a big cumbersome device. And maybe we'll get a shot of it for you. you're looking now at our probe that we place on the nose of Odyssey. It's a very heavy thing, but of course in zero gravity it weighs nothing, and it's much easier to move around. As a matter of fact, both Fred and Jack commented, as many people in the past have, of how much bigger the spacecraft appears in actual flight when you have such ease of movement compared to our simulators, which make training rather difficult.
Okay, we're seeing a good picture of the probe there, Jim, and looks like the characters shaved before the show this time.
Well, Fred said he had to keep up his TV image. Yeah, that may be my first and last time now, Jack. It took Fred 1 hour to shave. We might give you a quick shot of our entertainment on board the spacecraft, which has been keeping us company for some time. This little tape recorder has been a big benefit. To us in passing some of the time away in our transit out to the moon. And it's rather odd to see it floating like this in Odyssey while it's playing the scenes from 2001. And of course the tapes would be complete without Aquarius.
Okay, Jim, we're seeing a tape recorder now, and just by the way, how long do you expect to keep the TV on this evening?
Well, whenever you stand by one. Yeah, I got him with the cabin repress valve in there, Jack. Every time he does that, our hearts jump in our mouth. And Jack, anytime you want to terminate TV, we're all set to go.
Okay, Jim, it's been a real good TV show. We think we ought to conclude it from here now. What do you think?
Roger, sounds good, and this is the crew of Apollo 13, wishing everybody there a nice evening, and we're just about ready to close out our inspection of Aquarius and get back for a pleasant evening at Odyssey. Good night.
And this is Jules Bergman and Jim Burns again at ABC Space Headquarters in New York at 5:10 a.m. roughly Eastern Standard Time. That tape, Jim, of course, took place at only 9 p.m. last night, about 8.5 hours ago. It seems 8.5 years ago when Jim Lovell and Fred Haise first got up into Aquarius, their lunar module, to inspect it and be sure all was right. And now a message to our ABC stations across the country. A message we have to get across this way. ABC News will be on continuously with this special Apollo emergency report until after a Houston NASA news conference scheduled for 8 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, about 2 hours and a half from now. Starting at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, we'll have a 63-second station break every half hour. Repeating, there'll be continuous Apollo coverage until after the Houston News Conference at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Recapping the situation now, here with Jim Burns. The Apollo astronauts are in good shape. Their lives are in no immediate danger. They've done an emergency burn that puts them back into a free return trajectory headed back toward Earth. They're now setting up sleep and eating cycles as they head back to Earth. And now we're going to get the latest from Mission Control in Houston and pool correspondent Roy Neal, who's standing by.
The key to the situation of Apollo 13 was overheard a few minutes ago here in Mission Control when Flight Director Glenn Lunny asked, after all this power down we're about to do, will we have enough to make it? The answer came back, yes, just barely. And that was really the conclusion to several hours of pressureful work after the fuel cells went out in the command module. The mission control room filled rapidly with astronauts and key NASA officials. Very shortly, Lovell and Hayes moved to the command module. Moved to the lunar module. Swigert remained in the command module. Here in Houston at the Manned Spacecraft Center, other astronauts took their places in a simulator and began to duplicate the situation as closely as possible here on the ground. By now, the situation can best be described as stabilized. At this time, the spacecraft is on what they call a free return trajectory. If nothing else is done, it will still return to Earth. And the big question, of course, was one of, would there be power enough to keep on going? We know now that there should be. A schedule's been worked out. At this hour, we expect that the lunar module pilot, Fred Hayes, is getting some rest, about 6 hours of rest, while in the lunar module, Jim Lovell remains awake, and in the command module, Jack Swigert remains awake. They'll get their rest about 6 hours from now. And after that, the schedule calls for a rotation period and finally another burn, which should speed them on their way back to Earth. We don't as yet have a firm time as far as their landing, their splashdown. Those details are still being worked on here in Mission Control. And a number of the management executives are still here. Jim McDivitt of the Apollo Program Office is here. Gene Kranz, another of the flight directors, currently sitting in the mission director's position. Deke Slayton of the astronaut's office. And Glenn Lunny, still holding down his post as the night wears on. A long and pressureful nights in Mission Control. Roy Neal in Mission Control.
And if there was a theme word for this critical night, it was Glenn Lunny's phrase, Jim, will we have enough to make it after we power down? And the reply from his experts, yes, just barely. We're going to pick up some live air-to-ground coming in now from Jim Lovell.
Houston, I wonder if you're
And Fred Hayes
accounting
there.
for being bit off the belly band here and gone through the gas system.
And Fredo, I know you're supposed to start sleeping here pretty soon, but we got a new PC Plus 2 pad, P30 maneuver pad for you.
Stand by.
And there was some indication there, just as air-to-ground came up, that something was gimbaling the wrong way, perhaps one of the small control engines. No immediate explanation, but it doesn't sound super critical, judging from the calmness of both Fred Hayes, we were hearing there, and Capcom Jack Lausner. Of course, that calmness can be deceptive, as we know.
Okay, go ahead, Jack.
Okay, Fred, P30 maneuver. Purpose is PC Plus 2. Dips to, this time we're going to the MPL. And now 33, 079er, 27, 4013, plus 08144, minus 00443, minus 02226. Apogee is NA. Perigee is plus 00205. 08450. 55. 420. 268. 261.
And that
Plus.
that maze of
08,
numbers we're hearing read up are fresh
55.
figures for the LEMS guidance computer, the LGC as it's called, for program P30 to be inserted into the computer, which is an energy program or a speed program. Now being calculated for the MPL, the Mid-Pacific Line. It's a test to see how well that program already installed aboard the computer will work to guide them back to a landing in the Pacific, which again, Jim, shows what the intentions are of the control center, to get them back to the Pacific if at all possible.
We have a word, Jules, from the Department of Defense office at Mission Control from a representative of General David Jones. David Jones, who's the commander of Air Force Eastern Test Range and the manager for all support operations for Apollo. The DoD, Department of Defense representative, says that no Navy ships are being scrambled from East Coast ports for a possible contingency landing in the Atlantic because these ports are too far away and they don't feel they could get the ships out there in time. And they say they would have to use what they call ships of opportunity, which, as Jules mentioned before, could be anything from a freighter or a tanker right on up to a Russian submarine. The Pacific forces are in good shape. In the Atlantic, the main force that we rely on would be the HC-130 Hercules aircraft, which I'm sure are on standby at many locations, Ascension Island and other places around the coast. It's an interesting thing about this mission. Apollo 13 had a smaller standby support force than any other mission. We had approximately 5,000 people, 47 aircraft, and only 5 ships positioned around the world for the support of Apollo 13. Now, we can contrast that back to the Mercury series. When John Glenn rode Mercury for that historic flight, there were 26,000 people directly involved in support of that mission, in rescue and recovery support, over 125 airplanes and some 24 ships. That you can see as the technology has become more refined, as they've been able to judge much more accurately exactly where capsules will come down and when they'll come down, they felt that they could cut back, some might say severely, on the number of ships, planes, and personnel that would have to be involved in a rescue-type operation. And at the present time, there are no Navy ships standing by in the Atlantic. There was the USS New, which is a destroyer, and that was on recovery duty until there was a translunar insertion, as I recall. And then they took that ship off station and sent her back to Norfolk, Virginia. So at the present time, we have nothing in the Atlantic, but Jules indicates that probably we won't need anything in the Atlantic because apparently they're going to try and come down in the Pacific. Is that right?
Right. Jim, the latest readbacks we're hearing in flight plan changes being read by Jack Lausman of Capcom to the crew now call for the burn to be at about the time we talked about it, about 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, which would give us a new splash time of 142 hours and 47 minutes. And we calculate that to be in a Pacific landing, Jim, at almost exactly 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this Friday afternoon. 142 hours and 47 minutes, just 13 minutes short of the full hour.
Now,
about 1 p.m. Eastern Time this Friday afternoon is my calculation.
And in the Pacific, you mean in what had been preset as the primary landing area? Is that
Right, at this point, any place in the Pacific's a prime landing. No, I think it'll be roughly the prime landing area that had been intended, Jim. And that's the latest readback we've heard, and they're trying to joggle haze to get off the stick and stop worrying and go to sleep. Because they are now, well, if we went to the flight plan again, which we won't, they should have been some 3 or 4 hours into their sleep cycle. And they've been through a stressful night, probably only half as stressful as we've been through, Jim, since they're undoubtedly better trained and in better condition. But they should nevertheless get to sleep soon. And that's what Mission Control is trying to do, to jog haze on. That's the way we stand here at...
You have that map there, Jules. I wonder if you could give us a shot of the primary recovery zone as you see it, and it'll be on Friday. We anticipate around 1:30.
Right. I don't know how stable the platform I'm going to be at this point. holding this up, but I can endeavor. Okay. Here we are, and this is the same Earth orbit chart issued by the Space Agency, made up by the Air Force's, thank you, Jim, made up by the Air Force's Chart and Information Service, the same chart issued to the crews. All right, and the prime landing area originally intended had been here, close to Christmas Island in the Pacific, and indeed, if they come down along the MPL, the Mid-Pacific line, which runs up and down this way, they would come down Friday afternoon, 1 p.m.-ish, somewhere in this area. And, of course, there are enough Navy ships out there, and it's within easy enough range of Pearl Harbor, Hickam Air Force Base, and numerous staging bases to get more vehicles anywhere in the area, more ships or aircraft. Now, the sticky wicket situation you mentioned is our friend the Atlantic here, and I made several plot changes here, accounting for each of my dialectical errors of coordinates during the night. This was the last position I came out with. They'd land here about 1,500 miles east of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And, of course, that's where the Navy couldn't find even a tugboat that belongs to us. And so, of course, said any ship of opportunity is acceptable, as long as it won't sink the capsule while trying to
Where
rescue
would
it.
they stage aircraft from, would you
Well,
guess?
okay, they'd stage, Jim, out of Ascension Island. I don't know how tight our cameras can get here, but this marking up here is called ACN and ASC, and Apollo E Space Talk for the Manned Spaceflight Network, is Ascension. And let's see now, that's 600, 1,200, about 1,400 miles northeast of the landing point.
So it wouldn't be any problem for a Hercules type?
No, it'd be no problem for a C-130. It's near the limits of its endurance. It could refuel. It could do aerial refueling, but it might take some time to get a ship there. So the Atlantic landing area here, the prime landing area in the Pacific, which is the intent over here, and the latest calculations from Mission Control show they'd splash down here at 142 hours, 47 minutes into the mission, just about 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this Friday.
Jules, it's getting on toward 5:30 here in New York, and that means that a lot of people out on Long Island are getting up and in Westchester, and they're getting ready for that long commute into the city, and maybe they've turned on their television sets. I wonder if I can give a fairly brief recap of
Good, why don't you,
what's
and I'll have a
happened
sip of coffee.
so far. The trouble struck like a thunderbolt about 9:35 Eastern Standard Time on Monday, just after the three astronauts had a lengthy and good-humored talk to Mission Control. The Captain Lovell reported, quote, "Houston, we've got a problem." I'm sorry, that was Swigert who reported that. He said it in a matter-of-fact term, and no one put an awful lot of stock in it at that moment. But then in rapid succession came a series of reports from the three crewmen indicating that the command ship Odyssey had lost half of its electrical power and was losing all of the oxygen that powers the ship's vital fuel cell generators. The pilots reported they'd heard a bang and they'd felt a slight jolt when the emergency warning lights flashed on. A few minutes later, Lovell reported to Mission Control that an oxygen gauge was reading 0. "It looks to me, looking out the hatch, like we're venting something into space," Lovell reported. Something was going by the window, which apparently, according to Jules Bergman, was oxygen from a ruptured tank. Now, this caused the 48-ton tandem spacecraft to start a gentle tumble, and the pilots found that difficult to control. Officials said they had no idea of what had happened to the service module, the module which contained these tanks. But Dr. Harvey Nininger, now he's from Sedona, Arizona, wherever that might be, he's one of the world's foremost meteorite experts, said that the ship might in fact have been hit by a meteorite. In my opinion, Nininger said, that's just what happened. And the pilots found that difficult to control. Officials said they had no idea of what had happened to the service module, the module which contained these tanks. But Dr. Harvey Nininger, now he's from Sedona, Arizona, wherever that might be, he's one of the world's foremost meteorite experts, said that the ship might in fact have been hit by a meteorite. In my opinion, Nininger said, that's just what happened. McDivitt added weight to that theory when he said that It was something that appeared to be quite violent that occurred in Bay 4. And if it were struck by a meteorite, of course, that would be violent. It's hard to decide what's real and what's not real up here, Hayes was reported saying. Ground controllers in Mission Control tried at first frantically to save that hard luck mission, Apollo 13, but it soon became apparent that the Odyssey's supporting service module had been severely damaged by the mysterious failure, and in just about 3 hours, it was dead. Lovell and Hayes quickly turned their attention to the lunar module and fought to control the ship's tumble so they could use its lunar landing guidance equipment to steer the pilots back home. "Why the hell are we maneuvering?" barked Hayes when the big tandem spacecraft rolled and bucked as it continued to speed toward the moon. So just a little use of the imagination, and you can get a very frightening picture of what was happening up there in those dreadful moments. "I can't take that doggone roll out," replied Lovell, a veteran of the Apollo 8 lunar orbit flight that didn't have a lunar module along with it. Later, the pilots managed to activate the lunar lander's control rockets, and they settled the ship down. The pilots also reported that a large amount of debris, apparently from the service module, were hanging around in space outside their window and were making it difficult for them to take navigational sightings of the stars. And that's just about what happened until an hour or so ago, when there was a critical burn made as the Apollo headed around the moon, and perhaps Jules can tell us about that burn and about the one that's coming up.
Right, Jim. That first critical burn of the descent propulsion system of the lunar module, which had to be utilized because the SPS, or service propulsion system of Apollo itself, had no electrical power to ignite it. That first burn changed the orbit and ended the hybrid trajectory they'd been on and put them back into a free return trajectory, which will carry them at a low point of 136 miles around the moon and head them on a gliding path back to Earth. Now, they will do a second burn tonight at about 79 hours, 25 minutes into the mission, or about 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A second burn that will get them back to Earth somewhat faster and somewhat more stably, and will head them toward landing in the MPL, as it's called, a Mid-Pacific Recovery Line. If the oxygen situation should become critical, they can then do a third small burn that would get them back in the Atlantic, but it would shorten the return time by about 9 hours. So in the water Friday afternoon at about 1 p.m. for splashdown at 142 hours, 47 minutes, we should say, into the mission. If they continue this free return and they don't make the second burn. So the recovery in the Pacific should be essentially normal. The Navy's prime recovery fleet, headed by the aircraft carrier or helicopter carrier, Iwo Jima, should be on the scene, together with helicopters and other airplanes. Let's go. We've got a late report now from Apollo Control.
We were under the impression Terry had put him out. If he hasn't, I can give him to you.
Okay, Jack, I've got one more question about Odyssey.
Go ahead.
Okay, I still have the Pyro A, Sequence A, and Pyro B, Sequence B circuit breakers in. Do you want those out?
Stand by one. Odyssey, Houston, 2 circuit breakers you referred to, leave them in.
Okay, copy. Leave them in. Okay, Houston, I can control yaw and minimum pulse, stand by on pitch.
And Fredo, the Delta VR resultant computes with the components.
Fred's off the comm now, Jack.
Roger, your pad is good.
And Jack, we didn't get that whole sentence there.
Okay, I said that the Delta VR that Fred questioned computes well with the components. It's RMS.
Okay, copy. Okay, now, Jack, let's go this once more. You wanted me to try out controlling the spacecraft at pulse mode, is that correct?
That's affirmative. Set up a yaw right rate and monitor the middle gimbal angle.